Doug basically addresses some deep addictions that all of us are facing. And he does it in a really very Doug way, right, Doug? And just to let you know a little bit about Doug, Doug is the Director of Research at the TrueNorth Health Center in Santa Rosa, where Dr. Michael Clapper also works. Doug also has taught both statistics and psychology at Stanford University. Doug is the co-author of The Pleasure Trap, and he's been with the Institute team at our Sedona immersion, our week-long immersion, and our week-long immersions now for 4 years. And he was really, until we brought Doug on the team, it was a missing piece. And you'll see after this weekend why Doug is such a valuable asset for us and for you. Come on up, Doug.
It's really cool to see him out of breath. I've seen that guy run. You know, after like 4 miles, it doesn't look like he's out of breath. So that's really cool. My name's Doug Lisle. I'm a psychologist. It wasn't my first choice. I actually wanted to be an artist, and I should have been, but my father refused to give me the emotional support, more importantly, the financial support that my talent so richly deserved. History will judge him. You know, as much as I'd like to process my issues about that this afternoon, which believe me, I would, that's not what I'm here to do. I got stuck doing the psychology thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to answer question to mystery. And the mystery is, if you were alert enough, motivated enough, sharp enough, and lucky enough, and you had heard Rip Esselstyn, T. Colin Campbell, John McDougall, Neil Barnard, Rip, if you were lucky enough to hear this message, and you thought to yourself, you know what, that sounds right. That sounds like a solid place to go. Once you know the right direction to go, why is it so difficult to go there? That's what we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to be talking about scientific theories and I have charts and really important concepts, but mostly I'm going to be using my artistic skills to really bring this message home. So we're going to begin by asking and answering the most important philosophical question of all time. Everybody knows what this is, of course. Well, of course it's a shark, man. That was never in doubt. This one's a great white. You can tell by the distinctive markings. And the great philosophical question we have is, why does a shark have teeth? Teeth to eat. Yeah, a shark has teeth to eat. Why does a shark eat?
It's hungry.
Shark eats in order to survive. That's correct. And one thing you wouldn't know is that they don't actually teach you anything in psychology school. Yeah. All they do is they just see, they have a little meeting at the end of every year, and they see if you were a nice enough person. And they all get together and they say, well, Doug was a nice kid. Okay, we'll pass him to the next grade. And then next year, just make sure you watch your P's and Q's, because they're going to do the same thing. Was he nice this year? Yeah, so we go to the next grade. That's it. They're not teaching you anything. It's just, are you nice? Oh, just spotted an old friend. There you go. The good news is that at the very end, right when they're ready to graduate you, then they actually will tell you the one thing that they know. There's a secret. And that is, if you look at somebody from just the right angle, you can tell what they're thinking. It's a pretty good trick. So I happen to know what you're thinking. She's thinking, with information this insightful coming out this early in the lecture, she's glad she got the seat right up here in front. Yeah, sharks have teeth to eat. They eat in order to survive. What's the point of their survival? What are they doing here? They're procreating. It's exactly what they're doing. And a reproducing shark is a happy shark. Now, these guys down here, these little copies, are they exact copies of the big guy? Not quite. How come?
Takes two to tango.
Takes two, right? It takes two to make another one. So it's going to turn out that something is being copied, and the something that's being copied is actually genes, or DNA. And what's being copied, what those genes are, is they're actually being copied exactly. Not just pretty close, they're exact copies. So every once in a blue moon, the gene will be changed a tiny smidgen, but actually the genes that are in you that build you are exact copies of the genes that came from your parents. They're just scrambled up. Okay, so what life is life has got these playing cards that we call genes, and then in each species they have their own kind of deck, and then they just scramble them together with each new generation, but it's the same playing cards. It's the same jack of diamonds, it's the same six of clubs. It's all exactly the same. That's why if you look at your children or you look at your parents or siblings, you can see pieces of you in them. Okay, you can actually see the little components. You're a blend, you're a unique blend, and you're so unique actually that, well, let's put it this way: if you were a bridge player and you played bridge for years and years, sooner or later you'd get exactly the same hand, wouldn't you? Play enough hands, you'll finally get the same hand. But that will never be true in life. And that's because we don't have 52 cards in the deck. We've got 30,000. Okay? And so when they scramble those decks every generation, the hand that comes out that builds you is absolutely unique. It will never happen again. All that you're going to see is you're going to see little pieces of those cards in succeeding generations, and that's what gets copied exactly. So what nature does is actually copy genes, and that's what this guy's up to, along with his very important things to make sure that he uses those teeth to eat. So essentially what his life is eat, survive, reproduce over and over again. Now I have no idea, like, who set this up and why, this sort of thing. I leave ultimate origins to theologians and philosophers and people like that. But I do know how it's set up. This is the purpose of this thing's life. And the purpose of its life is actually the reproduction of genes. And it's just that simple, and it's a closed system, and there's nothing extra fancy over and above this. Now, the thing is that it doesn't do as much good to have teeth in that shark's head if it doesn't know what to do with them. So how does this guy know when to eat? It was when he's hungry, right? So, and what those things are, feelings like that and behavior that's associated with it, are instincts. And what instincts are is they're actually circuits, and they're located inside of his brain. And what those circuits are is they're actually electrical circuits. They're literally electrical. That's how they work. And what happens is energy comes in from the outside through some domain. It might be the compression of air, at which point there's going to be energy that's going to activate electrical circuits in an ear. It could be chemicals, so you might sniff a little bit of blood, and that chemical in the blood actually will be put inside of his olfactory system, and it will energize or activate an electrical circuit. But he'll identify it. He'll identify that as something that's got probably food on the other end of it if he can find it. It might be light that's coming from the sun that bounces off a tuna fish, and then what will happen is that that pattern of light will come into his eye, and actually what will happen is it will be agitating, causing electrical circuit activity that will activate an ancient library. And inside that library, he will actually identify that that's a prey. And that's what's going to happen. That if he's hungry, it'll activate a stalking sequence. And so actually what's happening inside of his life is the following. He's got a sensory system that's sort of an extension of his brain. And what happens is that different kinds of energy comes in from the outside world, and whether it's by touch, or whether it's by smell, or taste, or hearing, or sight, some kind of energy comes in from the outside and activates electrical circuits. Those circuits then bring that patterns of that information up to the brain, and then what the brain does is the brain runs computations on figuring out what behavior will now statistically maximize the likelihood of the genes being reproduced. That's what it is. The mind is actually a computer for that problem, and that's actually the only problem that the mind is designed to solve. And so it solves it in interesting ways. So if you're a human mother, one of the most important ways for you to statistically increase the likelihood of your gene surviving is to be very worried about whether Junior is safe. See what I'm saying? So there might be all kinds of other problems out here, but that winds up being the most important problem at that moment. So the brain is magnificent in its ability to run this calculus to try to figure out what's in the best interest of gene survival. So what instincts are is neural circuits. And what they are is that they're essentially, like I said, an ancient library inscribed into the nervous system that essentially is a handbook that tells that kind of creature how to be good at being that kind of creature. It's essentially been passed down as a way of behaving that is successful for you. So if you're a house cat, you take got a house cat, you got a string, and you wiggle it in front of them, they get all excited. Okay, if they're a kitten, they get a little bit clumsy about it, they're so excited, because what they're designed to do is to have behavior that will increase their likelihood of catching whatever at the end of that thing, because they're a rodent eater. See, if you have a rabbit, a pet rabbit, and you do that to them, they give you a blank stare like, what's the matter with you? Rabbit. I don't do that, okay? So each kind of creature has its own kind of nature, and then nature is, in fact, that library that we're talking about. So rabbits have rabbit nature, house cat has house cat nature, shark has shark nature, and humans have human nature. And one thing that's very interesting is that through the 20th century, academic psychology, the dominant view, and it remains the dominant view in academia, is that there's no such thing as human nature. Now that is amazing, but this is actually what psychologists have believed. You probably, if you've had psychology courses, you've heard the following statement, which is that you are the sum total of your experiences. That turns out to be not just wrong, it turns out to be unbelievably wrong. It turns out that you're much more than the sum total of your experiences. In fact, a tremendous amount of what you are was already built in. Just like a shark didn't have to learn how to be a shark, and a rabbit didn't have to learn how to be a rabbit, you didn't have to learn how to be a human. Okay? So now, as soon as psychologists, it wasn't until about 1990 that psychologists started to look for the signs of what we now know as human nature, and as soon as they started to look, they started to find it. But they hadn't been looking for it. Okay? So let me tell you about a few little things in human nature so you get the idea. Let's suppose you're living in an ancient time, and you're a nomad, and you've got your family with you, and you hike to the top of a mountain. And on one side of the mountain, you see a valley that has a bunch of green trees and a river, and you can see a bunch of flowers. And the other side of the mountain, you see a bunch of dead desert. Now, where do you go? There, right? You don't sort of know why, you just do. And the reason why is that you're picking up water cues. And it turns out you love water. Turns out around the world, the real estate next to the water is vastly more expensive than the real estate that's away from the water. It's because human beings love water because you're not a desert animal. Okay? If you're a desert animal, you'd go where the desert was. That would be a better solution for you. But you're not. You like all kinds of signs of water. So you not only like trees, you like them when they're big. Because if the trees are big, there's been water here for a long time and it's been here consistently. You also like the trees that have broad leaves better than you like conifers. And you like conifers because that shows that there's some water in this environment, but it also shows you that it's cold. What you actually want to see is nice broad leaf trees, because nice broad leaves take a lot of water to make those leaves broad. You also, if I show you photography and I show you different pictures of scenes with trees in them, you also like to look of a scene that has a bunch of trees that you can climb. You wouldn't know this consciously. But if I make the trees look like you couldn't climb the trees, you feel a little uncomfortable looking at that scene. But if it looks like you can climb them, you like that better. Okay? Not only that, you also like a scene that has water in it. So if it has a river in it or a lake, that's even better. Not only do you like the look of it, you actually like the sound of it. You're designed to like the sound of water. In fact, if you go into a new subdivision that's got a bunch of new houses all in a row, and there's no trees, you don't like that. no, you don't like it. Doesn't matter how beautiful it is on the inside, you don't feel comfortable. But if you go into a subdivision where it has curvy roads, you like the curvy roads better than the straight roads. Well, why would that be? Because the only thing in nature that looks like a curvy road is a riverbed. Okay? And it's telling you there must have been water in this environment. You also like to have an elevation because you like to look down on the scene. The reason why you like that is you like to have a gravitational advantage over predators and competitors. You also like color because you've got color vision because you're a primate that eats fruit. You actually have a fructose receptor on the tip of your tongue. But that kitten that we were just playing with the string doesn't have color vision. Doesn't need it because it's not trying to pick fruit out of an environment. It actually has an amino acid receptor on the tip of its tongue. It's a killer. That's what it likes. See? So when you all start putting it together, we start to see all kinds of features of human nature, and that's the library that we have, and we have many more features to that we've now discovered. However, it doesn't matter what kind of nature an animal has, they all work the same way. Turns out that there's 3 basic motivational principles that will explain why creatures do what they do at the most fundamental level. And the first one is, the pursuit of pleasure. So creatures do things that feel good, and they get this unmistakable signal from their nervous system that says you just did the right thing. And that thing is something that must be statistically associated with increased survival or increased reproduction. So give me a couple of guesses as to what the 2 main pleasure activities are for humans and other animals. Food and sex, right? So this shark is basically swimming through the water with a neon sign in its head that's saying, food, sex, food, sex, food, sex, unless it's a male, then it says sex, food, sex. This thing also is going to go through the environment always trying to avoid pain. So if it's a little too cold, it moves to where it's warm. If it's a little too warm, it moves to where it's cool. If it scrapes itself on a sharp rock, it stays away from that area. This thing is always trying to adjust, always trying to reduce any senses of discomfort, because the sense of discomfort is a signal from its nervous system that there's been a reduction in statistical likelihood of survival. So every little thing, just even adjusting in your chair, what you're doing is you're actually trying to relieve some of the tension in a muscle in the back that's starting to cramp up. Like all of these adjustments that you're constantly doing are little tiny pain avoidance mechanisms that are actually statistically associated with increased likelihood of survival. So that's a second thing that creatures do. A third thing that they do is they try to conserve energy. So these 3 things, if you think of them, this is the scheme or scoreboard for life. So you try to get as much pleasure as possible with as little as pain being risked and as little energy being expended. So this now helps explain all kinds of things, like fish swim in school, because they're going to do that because they're going to draft on each other just like race car drivers, trying to let the other guy push his way through the water and then he can follow a little bit easier. That's also why around the world, predators will go after the weak, the sick, the slow, the isolated, and injured. They do that automatically. They just do that by nature because they've got a natural circuit that says, if you're a predator, well, as I look at some prey, let's look for the one that stumbles or it's a little weaker. Okay, it's a much better utilization of energy to go for that one than to go for the healthy one. So this is how nature shaped the neural circuits of animals to save energy. Also, Canadian geese flying that characteristic V pattern, that migration, they're going to do that because they're going to draft on each other. Another example, me at my health club, drive up, wait around, wait for the lady to come out of the nice parking place right there, because God forbid I don't want to have to walk another 50 feet. Okay, so this is the classic human beings trying to save a precious little bit of energy. There's actually one other reason why those geese fly in that pattern. Anybody know what that is? Well, it saves energy, but my mother says, don't tell people this, Doug, but I'm just kind of thorough and obsessive. If they're flying in that pattern when they poop, they don't poop in each other's face. Just a little detail I wanted you to take away from the weekend. All right. So this is essentially the fundamentals of motivation. This is how animal life is constructed. However, you might say to yourself, there's got to be more to life than just pleasure-seeking, pain avoidance, and energy conservation. And indeed there is, but if we're going to figure out what that is, we're going to have to look That's something a little bit more complex than a shark. Everybody knows what this is, of course. Of course, it's a bird, ma'am. That was never in doubt. This one's a gray shrike. This is a proud bird of prey of the Mideastern desert. This one's a male. You can tell by the distinctive markings. And what this guy does all spring long is he flies around his territory and he kills bugs and he pokes them on thorns inside of his territory. Anybody want to guess why he does this? Attract a mate. Who said that? The gold digger in the front. Yes, that's exactly why he does this. It turns out that what happens is that the males work very hard to kill a bunch of bugs and decorate their trees, and then later on in the spring, after all this hard work is done, the females cruise into town and they cruise through the territories and see which guys have the most stuff in their trees, and then they mate with the guys with the most stuff. What a shot this is. Now we know this because a rather enterprising Israeli biologist camped out in a desert for a while, and he moved all the stuff from one guy's tree to another guy's tree, and all the girls went over there, and then he moved all the stuff from that guy's tree back to that guy's tree, and all the girls went over there. It's like, okay, we got it figured out. Now this actually also helped explain a really puzzling sociological mystery in Silicon Valley during the first big internet boom in the 1990s, why there were suddenly so many BMWs parked in trees. That you figured out. So yeah, that's what this guy does, and just in case you couldn't get it, the artist was going to help you. See that it's the gray stripe winking at you. Now, what's interesting about this guy is he's going to be fundamentally different than the shark, because the shark's behavior is actually pretty simple to understand. So it sees a mate, it moves towards a mate, it sees food, it moves towards a food. Pretty simple operation, it's pretty intuitive. But the shrike isn't. The shrike's over here killing bugs, putting them on thorns. It turns out he's not even eating them. And so he's going through this big hassle, he's exposing himself to predators and competitors. It's a big hassle, and yet he's doing this, and we can't figure out why he's doing it unless we take a broader view and really study his behavior from a longer term perspective. So his life is fundamentally more complex than what the shark is doing, and we're seeing what he's up to. So he actually has a long chain of behavior that is associated with his goal, not a short chain. So here he's killing bugs and putting them on thorns, and that's good. And then a rainstorm comes and takes stuff out of his tree, that's a bad day. Then he puts a bunch more stuff in his tree, that's a good day. And then a competitor comes and tries to just wrestle his territory from him and just take it. That's a bad day. He fights the guy off, and he wins, and he gets a mate. It's okay, it's all good. So our guy wins. Now, the winning that he's seeking here is ultimately, we know what's motivating us ultimately, which is the reproduction of DNA. But in order to reproduce that DNA, he actually has to have a neural circuit, he has to have an instinct that has behavior that winds up being statistically associated with increased likelihood of that happening. Which means he's got to have sex. In order to have sex, he's going to have to best the competition in order to be selected. So this is all a whole integrated chain of causality that's involved here. And at the end of it, there must be some kind of really powerful reward system that he must be seeking, and what that reward system is a dopamine flood. But inside of his brain, in a particular area we call the dopamine pathway, or the reward pathway, what will happen when he's eating or having sex is going to be a flood of dopamine. And as you would expect, the sexual activity will be the event in an organism's life that will be the biggest flood of dopamine that they're likely to get. And that's because it's the very activity that is necessary for the reproduction of DNA, so you would expect it to be very, very heavily incentivized, which it is. So that's how he's actually put together. And what's interesting about this is that you might say, well, how does he know how to do all these things? And of course, the first answer is instinct. That he simply has a compulsion when he's by himself in the woods, that there's some moth there, he just knows, go kill it, okay? But that kind of doesn't quite explain it, because there has to be motivational feelings that are associated with getting this done. So we know there are feelings around, lusty feelings around sexual activity, that makes sense. And there are feelings of hunger that will drive him to eat, okay? That's also true. But what's causing him to feel this thing that he needs to go and kill a bug and poke it on a thorn? What will chain that behavior for weeks in advance? You might think that maybe it's a little bit of dopamine, that every time he kills a bug and puts it on a thorn, maybe he gets a little bit of pleasure, okay, for every time he does that. Now, if nature organized or designed him this way, it would make perfect sense, but that's not what happened. The design of organisms does not, in fact, use pleasure chemistry in order to guide behavior like this. Nature invented and designed the organism with a completely different set of psychological experiences and completely different neural circuits and neurochemistry. And that's going to be what we call the moods of happiness. This is what happiness is. Happiness is the activation of happiness circuits. Happiness circuits are natural instincts that reside in organisms that have psychological complexity that need to organize their behavior over time. A shark doesn't need this. So a shark is just a pleasure-seeking, pain-avoiding energy conservation machine. It's just looking what's in its environment, and it's going to go for this, and it's going to stay away from that. It's very simple. But when you add a level of complexity to the organism's behavior, where it may need to do something competitive over here in order to be more competitive later in some other domain, then you're going to need to incentivize this behavior in some way. Think about a young man who's in the weight room lifting weights in the 8th grade because he's wanting to make the football team. See what I'm saying? He's doing something over here, and it actually feels good to accomplish it, because he's got to have a mood state that's helping drive this thing that will eventually try to get him on the high school football team. Why would he want to get on the high school football team? We all know why he wants to get on the high school football team. Because he likes to play football? Sure, he likes to play football. But that's also part of the mood of happiness that's associated with the pleasure-seeking activity that's actually driving the show. Okay? So now we know, after 6,000 years of recorded history and endless speculation and essentially mystery in philosophy, this was not known until very recently. But now what we know what happiness is. Happiness is actually a secondary guidance system that works along with pleasure seeking. They actually have joined together and intertwined in complex organisms in order to give this guy incentive signals over time, long ahead of the pleasure. You see, long ahead of it, we have to incentivize intelligent behavior that is statistically likely to lead to pleasurable activity. You can also have moods of happiness that are associated with escaping pain. So, for example, let's suppose you're some grandma and you are in downtown in a situation, you've got your grandkids with you, and you're almost out of gasoline, you take them to the opera, and now you're leaving, and then you're looking for a gas station, you take a wrong turn, and now it turns out you're in a rough neighborhood. Do you have feelings? You better believe you have rough feelings. Are they moods of unhappiness? Yeah, we wouldn't call them sadness, we'd call them anxiety, we might even call them guilt, but they're unpleasant. And what they're doing is they're saying, change direction, do something different, find a way out of this. Now, nobody's even brandished a sword at you or even given you a dirty look. You just realize we have now statistically reduced the likelihood of us all surviving. See what I'm saying? Even though it's infinitesimally small, you still picked up the cues. And as a result of that, now when you see the sign that leads to home, relieved moods of happiness. So the moods of happiness are operating and the moods of unhappiness are operating, both with respect to pleasurable incentives as well as pain avoidance. Now what we're going to do is we're going to try to take this information and put this little guy in a cage and try to learn something interesting. If we put him in this cage, we see that the cage has a couple of buttons. We've got a red button at the bottom and a blue button at the bottom. And if he hits the blue button, what's going to happen is a door's going to open, he's going to fly out into the aviary and start killing bugs and putting them on thorns, just like he's designed. But if he hits the red button, it's a magic button. And there's a trap door that it opens up underneath the cage and a female comes in all ready to rock. Now, based on your deep theoretical understanding of psychology, which button is he likely to hit? The red button. Why? It's immediate, it's easier, and more formally, what we learned before, what is he actually trying to accomplish? Pleasure seeking with the conservation of energy, right? So in other words, this is an energy conservation problem for him, and he's absolutely going to hit the magic button because it's a big payoff for not very much effort. Now we're going to put him back in there, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. And this time, the blue button is going to be the female that comes into the show, but the red button is going to be the magic button. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a little catheter inside of his head, and in that catheter, we're going to put cocaine. And every time he hits that button, he's going to get a blast of cocaine right into the pleasure centers of the brain. And let me tell you that what cocaine does is it essentially causes a dopamine flood. That is exactly how cocaine works. Now that you know how he's wired up, now what do we think he's going to do? Red button, why? Pleasure seeking and the conservation of energy principle, exactly the same motivational structure. Okay? Now, many of you have heard about these studies before, and you'll know that it's not uncommon for a laboratory animal in a situation like this to be dead in 10 to 12 days. The plenty of food in there, it's not that interested in eating. You could bring a female in, not that interested in mating. Plenty of water, not that interested in drinking. What's happening is that the cocaine is an unnatural flooding of those circuits, and it's essentially overly loud, and the system is not designed to have stimuli that are inconsistent with the natural history of the organism. Organisms are designed with exquisite balance about how to respond to competing sensory inputs. So if you're a rabbit, you may be very hungry, but if you see a predator, even though there's food there, you basically can run the calculus that says, you know what, it's not worth it. You can't learn by doing. Your nervous system already has the internal calculus performed. See, it's already done. You come prepackaged with that brilliant analysis. But that's only going to work if we don't have unnatural stimuli coming into the system. If we now have an unnatural stimulus in the system, we now throw off the internal calculus and we make mistakes inevitable. It's like if you have a calculator that you're using to do all the computations for your business, but every time you hit a 3, it says it's a 9. Okay? It's going to make mistakes. And this is exactly what's taking place here. But we've now seen that this guy's motivational system is in trouble. He's making a mistake. And yet, if we were on Star Trek and we had a universal translator and we could ask him how he was feeling in the middle of this process, he would say, I don't know what's going on, but it feels really good. It feels like I'm being really successful. I feel like this is what I should be doing. This is pretty awesome. That's what he'd be feeling. What's amazing is he's feeling super successful while he's committing suicide. Okay? From the subjective view of the organism, this is a very important principle to grasp, and this is what Dr. Alan Goldhammer and I call the pleasure trap. This is a mechanism by which when you alter the stimulus environment away from the natural history of the organism, it's going to make mistakes. The question is simply not, will they make mistakes? It's how big the mistakes are. And now, we had a young man that came of age at just the right time in America to be a star, mid-century, where the television, recording industries, and movie industries were maturing, and they're looking to dump adulation on one guy, and Elvis was the guy. So Elvis, in his early life was very happy because he was a 21-year-old, very early, quickly successful musician, handsome, talented. This guy had it all right? Pretty soon, he's living in a cage with nothing but magic buttons. And we know what he looked like in his old age by the time he was 35. He was in deep trouble. He was essentially an organism that had lost his natural compass. And he spent his later years between then and his 42nd year when he died, essentially looking to right that compass. And he was turning to spirituality and trying to find it. Couldn't find it. It was too hard a job. We aren't designed to actually find the correct path in the face of that kind of confusion. So now what we're going to do is, we all know about how horrendous drug addiction can be, but we're now going to turn to the most costly addiction of all, which is going to be the modern food supply. You guys, other people, you heard Dr. Esselstyn this morning, right? Okay, he had charts and stuff, so I just got charts of my own, just putting them up here just to show that I have charts. Okay, see? There, that chart. All right. This is going to now, we're going to look at the foods that are the most popular. Most popular food craving on earth is chocolate. But what's in chocolate that people like so much? Fat and sugar, okay? It's also got some magic chemistry in there, but those are the two things that are really driving the show. What's in hot dogs that people like? Salt and fat, okay? What's in cheese that they like? Fat and salt, okay? What's in French fries that they like? Fat and salt. What's in chips that they like? Fat and salt, just a dried French fry, okay? Burgers. It's mostly fat and salt. Now, people are designed by nature to like that protein texture. That's true. But most of the pleasure receptors are being rung up by the fat and salt. The modern meats are typically maybe 50% fat. The meat of your natural history would have been 3 to 15%. Very, very different product, vastly richer, and then of course salted up. So sugar, fat, and salt. Let's look some more. Other things. Pizza. Refined carbohydrate and fat and salt on the cheese. Okay. Donuts. Fat, sugar. Ice cream. Fat, sugar. Ice cream introduced in Paris in 1677. Reviews for 300 years. Not only is it basically pure fat and pure sugar, there's some other characteristic of ice cream that people really like. Cold, that's not it. Soft. It's soft. If it's soft, what do you think is doing? Why is the soft attractive? Less energy. You don't have to chew it. Okay? This winds up being a major issue with modern food. Modern food, people make it soft because it vastly reduces the energy expenditure needed to digest it by 12.5% typically. This is a big deal. It's effectively increasing the caloric density of the food one whole more notch, you see. When we look at these things, what else we got there? No, I put chocolate twice because I like it. Okay, now, when we look at this, we see sugar, fat, salt, sugar, fat, salt. Almost as if the organism was designed by nature to eat sugar, fat, and salt, which is exactly what it was designed to eat. You are designed to eat sugar, fat, and salt. That's why the pleasure of those things is not accidental. That's wired right up to the dopamine centers in your brain. So you're designed for this, but the question is, why is this all out of whack? And the answer is, we've taken the food apart, pulled out and just taken the chemicals that will cause that pleasure reaction, and we've super concentrated them to the fact that they're going to overwhelm the pleasure receptors. People were chewing coca leaves in South America for thousands of years, and all they got out of it was a tiny little lift. Not very big deal. See what I'm saying? It was only when they synthesized it in the late 1800s that we wound up with a problem, you see. Now we have something that's super concentrated around that chemical action, and that's exactly what these are. These are now modern creations of ingenious chemistry designed by nature to give a supernormal stimulus to the pleasure receptors in your olfactory taste buds. That's all it is. Now, let's look at this. This is how it's going to work. So here is time one. This is you on natural foods, and this is a normal relationship between your pleasure in your life and in your food, etc. And so this is normal. And then what we're going to do here at the next phase is we're going to introduce junk food. And when we you know what? I've always hated this chart. There's a chart. Okay, so here we have healthy food, whole natural food, and this is the amount of pleasure here at time 1. Then we have junk food here being introduced at time 2. Now the reason why we're going to have a response is the junk food is more concentrated in the pleasure chemicals. And we get rid of the fiber, and the water, and the vitamins, and the minerals, all this stuff that's tasteless, that is supposed to be there in the food. So we just concentrate it into the chemicals that cause the dopamine reaction. Of course, when we do that, that's exactly what we're going to get. We're going to get a very substantial rise. And now you might say, wow, that's pretty cool. I know what that means. I know what that tastes like. Why wouldn't I want to live there? Now, it's completely reasonable to actually want to live there. My grandfather was a Methodist minister. He was a very difficult human. He used to like preach to people. I'm not like that. I'm like laid back, California's vegetarian psychologist. You know, how flaky can you get, right? I'm not like that. The reason why I talk about these issues and use words like addiction is because you don't get to live here. The problem is if you did, and this was your life experience relative to this, if you got to do that, then this would be a legitimate cost-benefit analysis of saying, well, how much more pleasure am I going to get from my food all these years? And then how soon am I going to get my diabetes or my cancer or my heart disease? Let me just really run a cost-benefit analysis here. How many years is this going to cost me? When are they going to cut off my feet? Essentially, like, well, I got to think this through. And that's actually what people believe. They think that they're running that cost-benefit analysis when they think about changing their diet and getting healthier. But folks, that's inaccurate. That's a massive delusion, and it's a very, very expensive delusion. The truth of the matter is you don't get to stay there. This is an unnatural activation of those neural circuits. If you eat that stuff for a few weeks, it's gone, and now you're down here, you habituate into what we are here at level 3. This is true with anything. It's true with coffee, it's true with cigarettes, it's true with alcohol. It doesn't make any difference. What happens is that as you introduce this thing, if you use it continually, which people do, what's going to happen is the neural circuits are not going to fire as fast as when it was first introduced. This is just like going to somebody's house at Christmas time and you smell their Christmas tree. It smells great, right? For about 15 minutes and you can't smell it. That's because the initial concentrations and the natural concentration, you really notice it, it's fantastic, but pretty soon your nerve cells say, well, that's enough. We're really not interested in firing that fast anymore. We're going to go back down to a normal firing level, and we will tell you if it gets more concentrated still. You see? If we were to right now take these lights and we take them up 20%, you would notice that it was brighter, right? And then if we dimmed them back down to where they are now, when that happened, you'd say, whoa, it just got dim. You see? So you'd be having those experiences, but actually you don't feel like it's dim now. Your nervous system is changing. It adapts to the intensity of the stimuli, and it turns out that when we give people supernormal stimuli, sure, there's an activation here, but people adapt to it. This is what happens when somebody gets introduced to cocaine. So, you know, I've dealt with addiction for 30 years clinical work. And I can tell you many times I had people chasing their whole lives the first time they used cocaine. Because the first time they used it, it was off the chart. It happened to hit their neurochemistry super well, and it was unbelievably satisfying. And then what happened is, very quickly, the nervous system starts to defend itself against the supernormal stimulus. It actually paints little protein covers over the sensitivity neurons. And what happens is, after a while, now they're only here. And now they're only here, and then pretty soon they're here using to get to there. And that's how it works. So now we ate this stuff, and now we're here, and now we're at stage 3. And now here is where we got lucky. Because we were sharp enough and alert enough and motivated enough and lucky enough, and you heard a Dr. Esselstyn. okay? And you said, that's the right direction to go. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna try to start going that direction because I want to feel better, look better, and live better, and that's what I wanna do. So you decide to do this, and what's gonna be your reaction? That should be your reaction. Your reaction should be, oops, there goes the pepperoni pizza replaced by, oh, that's not as good. That should be your reaction because your nervous system is going from high intensity stimulus to a low intensity stimulus, and you're now under activating those pleasure neurons. And now we have the answer to the question that we started with. The question was, if you know the direction to go, why is it so difficult to go there? The answer is because when you do the wrong thing, it feels right, and when you do the right thing, it feels wrong. That your motivational instincts are actually spun exactly 180 degrees in the wrong direction. This is why if you've attempted this before and you've stopped and started and fallen off the horse, please don't despair. There is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with your psychology. You are not weak. You do not lack conscientiousness. You don't lack intelligence. You don't lack emotional stability. You don't lack anything. It's situation normal. Okay? This is the devastating trap that we now have created for ourselves. Only human genius can create such a thing, and we've got it. It's a tough one. Now, it's going to turn out that we can dig our way out. If we stay on a healthy course for a few weeks, it comes all the way back, and now we're back to the beginning. Now we're fine. Okay? A few weeks, people can grumble. This can be hard to do it for a couple hours. It can be difficult to get people to even eat 2 or 3 healthy meals in a row. So this is no trivial thing. The most important thing you need to know is that it's time limited, that you will actually crawl out of that trap. That will happen. I have a sister who is a competent human, but has struggles with this, and will say to me, come on, Doug, Rip, people can't do this. People just can't eat healthy food like this. And I explained to her, Margie, do you really think that we were designed to dislike our natural food? How would that be possible? No animal dislikes its natural food. They all love their natural food. So if human beings are not loving their natural food, there is nothing wrong with the food. See, what we've got is we've got an adulterated palate behind a trap, and we've got to work it out. Now, it's going to turn out that this is no easy trick. This is a few weeks to get this done. And you might say, wow, that's pretty hard. But before you say that that's too hard, I want you to tell you that that very same recovery curve to retain pleasure sensitivity in a long-term drug addiction, like alcohol, methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, that's more like 15 to 17 years. You talk about heroic. That's the most heroic thing I ever see people do. They're down here and they realize, you know what, I've got no choice. I'm not going to just take the short hit for once in my life now. I'm in trouble. I'm going to dig, and I'm going to dig hard, and I'm going to keep doing the right thing even though it doesn't feel the right thing. Over and over and over and over and over, and one day at a time, I'm going to crawl myself out of here. Okay? In a year, they're about halfway out. They're about 80% of the way out, maybe in about 3 years. And then for the rest of their life, they'll slightly be getting a little bit better and a little bit better as the brain continues to heal. Now that is fantastic. Okay? If they can do it, we can do it with a much lighter weight addiction. Okay? All right, what are some tricks? Well, there's 3 tricks. Friendly, little complicated tricks. All right, first trick is that you can starve yourself. Now, what do I mean by this? It's going to turn out that a useful thing for some of my clients to do is to just not eat for a day. So you wake up Sunday morning, don't eat Sunday morning, don't eat Sunday noon, just wait till Sunday night. So you've gone 24 hours. So you ate Saturday evening, wait till Sunday evening. If you do this once a month, what's going to happen is that you're going to get a little bit more sensitivity in that palate, and then Sunday night, healthy food is going to taste a little bit better. So that's just a nice little practice to go through once in a while. If you find yourself drifting into the trap, you can sort of pull yourself back out of that trap every now and then. And sometimes it's a useful thing to do it almost ritualistically, like first weekend of every month or something like that. Another thing that you can do is to, if you want to go a little bit longer, maybe a couple days or 2 or 3 days, to use just fresh natural juices. If you'll do this, the utility of this is that it's pleasant because we're leaving the sugar receptors under plenty of stimulation, and we're leaving glucose metabolism fine in terms of you've got plenty of energy. But what we've done is we pulled the salt and fat receptors completely offline because there's no sodium essentially, and there's no fat. And so as a result of this, those taste buds get more sensitive over a couple of days, and then when we go back to a healthy, normal diet that has some fat, has some salt in it, at low levels, it tastes better. Natural food tastes better. So those are 2 tricks. The third trick is to go to jail. My friend Dr. Alan Goldhammer runs the prison up at TrueNorth Health Center, Northern California. And at the TrueNorth Health Jail, in prison, you're supposed to give you bread and water, but at Goldhammer's place, we skip the bread. It's just water. That's all you get. This is water-only fasting, and it turns out that sometimes a period of extended water-only fasting, maybe a week, a lot of times people will come and they won't eat for a week. Okay, I'll admit it. Sometimes they don't eat for 4 or 5 weeks. Human beings are actually capable of going that long without food. That would only happen and would only be recommended only with supervision of people like Dr. Michael Clapper, our medical person at TrueNorth. In other words, only under that kind of supervision would that be smart to do. But people routinely will come to TrueNorth and fast for a week. And guess what happens after fasting for a week? You're dreaming about carrots. You smell baked potatoes cooking and you cannot believe how much allure they have just like that. And if you taste them in their natural state, they taste fantastic, just like you were designed to experience natural food. And that is the biggest, baddest reset that you can do. Only recommended under supervision, but that is, if you're a major criminal in this arena, this is a jail that you can go to, all right? These are some simple ideas that you can use, and the first 2 you can use right in your own home, right in your own life, very simple, and they can really help you and help you always get back and return to a better way of living and a better way of eating. And if you do this and stay the course, even though it's a difficult journey, I can tell you that this is the way to get to the life that you deserve. Thank you very much, folks. It's a pleasure.